Joining us from London is the head of Middlesex University's Latin American Studies Research Group, Francisco Dominguez. Jose Aristimuño served in the Obama administration and is currently the CEO of Now Strategies, a public affairs firm based right here in Washington, D.C. With us from Boston is Steve Ellner. He's written extensively about Latin American history and politics and is currently the Associate Managing Editor of Latin American Perspectives. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Steve Ellner, let me start with you. And as you heard from our correspondent there, events very fluid. What is your assessment of what's happening in Venezuela right now?
Well, I think it was evident that if the attempt to oust Maduro didn't gain momentum within a few hours, that it would fail, because it began with an announcement. It was kind of a deviation of what usually happens in these cases, in which the military dissidents announce that they have the entire military institution on their side. In this case, there were just a handful of lower-level, lower-ranking members of the National Guards, guardsmen who were really lower-ranking than the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, led by a colonel. But they were calling on the military to support the coup. In other words, usually the dissidents announce that they have the military on their side. That wasn't the case this morning. And just like, this is a repetition really of what happened in January, on January 23rd, and then again on February 23rd, when Guaido announced that his shadow government would oust Maduro. That didn't happen. And everybody was saying that if there isn't momentum within a short period of time, it's going to fail. And I think that's more or less what happened today.
Jose Aristimuño, just a couple of things there. Firstly, as Stephen Ellner just told us, Guaido does not have the support of the military. He has the support of a few soldiers, but not the support of all the military. How much of a setback is that?
Well, look, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that this sort of things take time.
Right.
Maduro and his dictatorship have been in power for over, well, even if we go back to Chavez, we're talking about 20 years. So we're not going to take our country back in 2 days. It's going to take time. I have to disagree with Stephen in a few things. First and foremost, we're getting closer, right? Every time we get closer, let's go back. We're taking control of the opposition. I'm talking about Guaido, right? We're taking back of Citgo, which there's a lot of money there with oil. We've increased sanctions dramatically, not only with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Iran, which is very connected with Venezuela. So we've advanced. Over 50 countries across the world support and recognize President Guaido as the country's leader. Now, in terms to the military, I think there's no question that there needs to be more broader support of the military. Having just Leopoldo Lopez out after four years in house arrest, it's a big sign, and it gives hope to the Venezuelan people. The only way that Maduro is going to be able to be ousted and be able to be out is by the Venezuelan people in Venezuela to be out on the streets every single day. This is not over yet. We're just getting into the night. A lot of interesting things always happen when the sun is gone. We got to remember that nobody knew that this was going to happen this morning. The opposition have been, and I think they learned their lesson, right? They've been acting very low profile and not saying much. So it's going to get interesting. I don't think this is over just yet.
Steve Ellner, what do you make of that? Guaido may not have the whole military behind him. He may have lost momentum, or as Stephen Gibbs pointed out, he may have lost some steam. But there have been incremental successes in his attempt to break Maduro's hold on the country.
Well, yes, I agree that the position of the U.S. government has been naturally very important. There are sanctions that are now, as a matter of fact, going into effect right now, new sanctions in which the Trump administration has announced that there will be reprisals against companies, what's known as secondary sanctions. That is, companies that are not U.S. companies that are purchasing or involved in any kind of transaction involving Venezuelan oil. So there's no question about it. But I think that the key point is the participation or non-participation of the popular sectors of the population. And this has been a constant. There were 4 months of protests in 2014, known as the Guarimba. In 2017, the same thing happened, 4 months of bloody protests. But those protests were mainly located in the middle class, upper middle class areas. They didn't extend, for the most part, to the popular sectors. And I think something similar to that happened today. The protests were taking place in the eastern part of Caracas. That's the affluent, where the upper middle class lives. Guaido and Lopez went to Altamira.
Right.
From Carlota. Altamira is the center of the middle class resistance to the Maduro government. So I think that's the key factor.
All right, let's bring in Francisco Dominguez. He's in London. Francisco, the government, as well as some people in the Trump administration here, as well as Guaido's representative in Washington, are saying that this is not a coup. Yet the government in Venezuela says this is an attempted coup, which by definition means it's something unconstitutional. It's an illegal seizure of power. Is it a coup?
Well, when you mobilize the military illegally and then claim that you have taken over one airbase, the Carlota, and then you claim that the person in charge of that airbase, the general, is on your side, and very soon many other military are going to join you in order to oust the government, that is a coup d'etat by any standard that you want to look at. It seems to me that the problem that Guaido faces is this. He has promised so many times that he's going to overthrow the government. He's been given date after date after date after date. And it seems to me that behind that inability to do it lies the United States, that is also stuck in the same position. One can look at this by saying, well, maybe there is an incremental expansion of what the opposition is able to do. Certainly, Voluntad Popular, not necessarily the whole opposition. But on the other hand, one can look at it and say, well, the United States thought that to get rid of the Cuban government back in the 1960s was going to be an easy thing. And 60 years on, we're still there. It seems to me that that's the difficulty. Put it differently, Guaido had to do something dramatic because he'd become a sideshow, and the main thing was becoming the US sanctions. And the US, apart from the sanctions, has run out of options. The only option that seems to be left to them, since Guaido is not going to be able to do the job as they wish, is going to be some sort of serious military action which they don't seem to have the nerve for. And it seems to me that Guaido, Voluntad Popular, and that section of the opposition, including the, Bolton, Pompeo, Elliot Abrams, and Mike Pence, and Trump, seems to be stuck. They don't seem to be progressed because this is going to continue.
Right.
The reason why this is like as it is at the moment, it's a standoff, is because the government is extremely careful not to escalate things.
Right. Let's go back to Stephen Gibbs in Caracas. And Stephen, I wonder if you could clarify for us the makeup of the Venezuelan military. I mean, we've been getting these reports all day that some of the military broke away backing Guaido. Then we heard that it wasn't really the country's military that was doing that, but it was part of the National Guard. Are there different forces here?
Well, they all come under the same umbrella, really, but I think it is a fair point that this would have been a lot more dramatic if we'd seen, for example, significant parts of the Air Force or the army rebelling, the army with tanks, etc. These were certainly National Guardsmen out there with Juan Guaido. And this is a problem in a way he's got, is sort of trying to flip the senior ranks of the conventional military forces here. That's been extremely difficult for him. Why is that? Well, one reason is that the military here is very politicized, and people do argue that those right at the senior levels of the military have benefited from some of the problems of this country, including corruption, while meanwhile those at the lowest ranks, people like those National Guardsmen that were out there with Juan Guaido, they are suffering in the same way that many people in ordinary Venezuelans are. For example, their monthly salary will probably be, maybe $10 a month because of the hyperinflation here and the crash of the economy. So it's relatively easy, it does seem, for Guaido to persuade those lowest ranks, and particularly within the National Guard, to join him. But is he going to be able to do this unless he has the army behind him, and as yet we don't have evidence that that is transpiring.
Steve Ellner, Guaido has been trying to assume power since January. Why do you think he made this announcement and went to the airbase today, the last day of April? Why today?
Well, I think it has something to do with the fact that the opposition is divided. It's not a unified force. And Guaido became the leader of the opposition on January 23rd when he announced his shadow government. And other members of the opposition who had second thoughts about the whole plan to launch a separate government, a shadow government. But nevertheless, they fell behind Guaido. Guaido has lost momentum. He's lost the initiative. And this was a way for him to get back in, to say that he's an important player, and to make clear that he is, heading the movement to oust Maduro. So this might explain why he is taking this initiative in order to avoid other sectors of the opposition, which support other strategies. For instance, the possibility of a dialogue with the government.
Right.
This is something that Guaido, who represents the more radical fringe of the opposition, grouped in the party Voluntad Popular, which Lopez heads, they oppose dialogue with the government. So that might have something to do with the timing of this action.
Jose, how big a problem is that for Juan Guaido, the fact that he has lost momentum?
Well, I don't think he has lost momentum. I think a lot of the operation is being done in secrecy, so the media doesn't really catch on fast enough, and the public doesn't catch fast enough, which makes it seem that he has lost momentum. I think what happened today in Venezuela was carefully planned.
Yeah.
I think this sort of plans and secrecy strategies are going to continue to happen, and we learned, right? We know that Maduro got a hold of phones, Guaido's chief of staff, right? There was a lot of the strategy was done through phones and whatnot. So I think unfortunately they've had to change the strategy. And number one is don't tell the world, and certainly don't tell the media what you're going to do. I think this is going to continue to happen. I think we have to look at this in perspective. What Juan Guaido has been able to do in the last 90 days, no other opposition leader has been able to do in the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah.
So I think he hasn't lost momentum. I think this sort of things take time. And again, it's going to be impossible for Maduro to remain in power when a majority of the world don't recognize him as president.
But it's the Venezuelan people that count, isn't it?
Sure, right. And
okay, I want you to listen to what the Venezuelan Defense Minister, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, had to say about Tuesday's turn of events. Let's watch this.
A Miraflores no se llega.
Violence doesn't get you inside the government palace of Miraflores. He who gets inside Miraflores with violence will be ousted with violence. And then we will find ourselves in a perverse game.
So, there's a warning there against this violence escalating. We've already seen violence today. Could it escalate even more? Could we see widespread violence?
I think we could. In part, we have to recognize that, for example, today, in Maduro's, there was a armed vehicle, right, that tried to run over some protesters. So this is just not on the opposition. I understand the part of the strategy is for Maduro to say they're trying to incite violence, right? The opposition, Guaido is trying to incite violence. He can leave any day, right? The United States have said it. The Venezuelan people have said it. There were rumors that he was boarding a plane today, like we were saying earlier. There are also negotiations. There are negotiations happening behind the scenes to see if he's going to leave. I don't think it's sustainable for Maduro to stay. His days are counted, but again, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. There's a lot of fear, too. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of military folks who want to go to the right side of history, but they haven't done it yet because of repression, what happens to them if they come out, and consequences thereafter.
Francisco Dominguez, on the question of Nicolas Maduro leaving Venezuela, Juan Guaido's envoy to the United States, Carlos Vecchio, he had this to say about what is going on in the country. Let's watch this.
We will see more events in the hours and the days to come. I want to be very clear with the international community. This is not a military coup. This is a constitutional process led by the Venezuelan people under the leadership of a civilian, the interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido.
So, Francisco, if we look at this, is there any part of the Venezuelan constitution that allows for the leader of the National Assembly, in this case Juan Guaido, to declare himself president?
He claimed Article 233, which actually doesn't hold any water. And the whole campaign originally was based on this particular article. And then he changed that to something else, which is Article 187, Clause 11, which is supposed to be to allow, international military missions, both from Venezuela outside and from outside into Venezuela. But mission means normal exchange of military attaches, these kind of things, not military intervention in the way he suggests. So he's got no constitutional basis whatsoever. And although this has been propounded by many, particularly in the media, this is not the case. And it seems to me that his difficulties, and I insist on the argument that he's stuck, if you look at the reaction of the European Union, particularly in the last period, regarding the possibility of US military action to help Guaido to oust violently President Maduro, the European Union was horrified. Federica Mogherini actually issued 4 statements saying, using the words that she and the European Union categorically oppose and reject the use of force. And Mike Pence went to the Lima Group with a similar agenda, trying to get them to issue statements suggesting military action by Latin American armies. This was rejected, and the Lima Group actually issued a statement against it. And then they tried to persuade the Brazilians, and although Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, made the statements to that effect, which were a bit ambiguous, the military in Brazil have been absolutely clear. So in that sense, it seems to me that Guaido and the people behind him, which is the United States, the Trump administration, are stuck. They do not know how to progress this, and this is the difficulty. That's why Guaido had to do something now in order to show that he's still somebody important. But with this, I think it's going to make his situation politically worse.
Stephen Gibbs, right now, Nicolas Maduro has the support of the top brass of the military, or large parts of the military. But what about the people of Venezuela? Is there any idea of telling how much support he has among ordinary Venezuelans?
Is that question?
Well, the
was
latest
Stephen Gibbs, yeah.
polls do suggest that the latest polls, if I heard you correctly asking about President Maduro, it does seem that his support has slipped a bit from around 25% about 12 months ago to something closer to 15%. It's very difficult to tell accurately. In terms of Guaido, he is the most popular of the opposition leaders, and there have been suggestions that he could easily attract around 60% of the popular vote were there an election. I mean, the other person always worth bearing in mind is, and it's a significant development today, is that Leopoldo Lopez, who for a long time was by far the most popular opposition leader. Yeah. He did get out of house arrest today, although he sort of almost put himself back into arrest by going into the Chilean embassy in Caracas. He's a significant player amongst the opposition, and many people actually say he is the sort of the man behind Guaido, that Guaido might, some even suggest, sort of almost be an instrument of Leopoldo Lopez. The difficulty the government has here is this is a country in a deep economic recession, and so maintaining the sort of popular support that they need to maintain what they would describe as a popular revolution, they're struggling on that.
All right. Steve Ellner, the United States National Security Advisor, John Bolton, he was talking about Venezuela today at the White House, and one of the things he said was that all options are on the table, which a lot of people interpret and see that as shorthand for military intervention. Do you see the U.S. getting involved in a military way in Venezuela?
Yeah, I definitely see that as a possible scenario, especially given the fact that things haven't worked out the way Washington has wanted in terms of the events on January 23rd, February 23rd, and not today. That is a definite possibility. And I think that as was previously mentioned, the fact that the countries of Latin America, even the right-wing countries, I mean, after all, Chile is the president of Chile, Piñera, Macri in Argentina, and Temer in Brazil previously, they were opposed to participation in military intervention. But you know, Scott, the senator from Texas today, announced that, or called on Trump to send troops to the frontier in order to support democracy in Venezuela. So that is definitely on the table. It's a very worrisome possibility, even though I think it's going to activate nationalism throughout Latin America. There's no question about it, that the sense of national sovereignty, the idea that other countries don't have the right to intervene internally in domestic issues is at play here. And so that is a very definite possibility.
Right. Jose, I want to stay with John Bolton and that news conference that he had in Washington today. This is something else that he said. Let's watch this.
We think it's still very important for key figures in the regime who have been talking to the opposition over these last 3 months to make good on their commitments to achieve the peaceful transfer of power from the Maduro clique to interim President Juan Guaido.
So I was wondering if you could clarify something for us here. You know, what John Bolton is suggesting there is that there are members of Maduro's government, key members of Maduro's government, that have been talking to the opposition, that have been talking to Juan Guaido.
Well, yeah, they have. There's behind-the-scenes negotiations going on right this second. And look, I think part of it is those negotiations take time. Maduro's folks want something. You know, we want something different. Part of it, what they have been talking, part of the talks have been, Maduro needs to get out. Let's put a military sort of board of directors per se, right? Let's put a military cabinet until we have free elections. I mean, we've said it. And President Guaido, let me say something. President Guaido has been very clear from the very beginning. He intends to be the interim president of Venezuela until there are free elections. The issue here that started this whole thing is that last year, President Maduro decided to advance the elections. And there were illegal elections herein, therefore, in January of this year, they were illegitimate.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.